My name is Caroline. I am 32, and on a freezing winter night, my husband locked me out of our house in the snow and would not let me back in for so much as a coat. I stood on the porch with my purse on my shoulder, holding my old rescue dog Buster, and nothing else. Through the gap in the door, my mother-in-law, Claire, said the thing she had been saying my whole marriage. You cannot do anything on your own. Caroline, you are desperate. Behind her, my husband Gabriel pulled the curtains shut in what used to be our living room. The next morning, I drove to the bank to use an old card my first husband had left me years ago, just hoping for gas money and a cheap motel. The manager swiped it, looked at her screen, and went white. "Ma'am," she whispered, "please sit down. You need to see this." 48 hours later, Claire was not the one giving orders anymore. Welcome back to my channel, where the pregnant wife they locked out in the snow turns out to be the one holding everything they never knew they had. If you have ever been called desperate by the very people who were leaning on you the hardest, stay right here, because what that bank manager found on her screen changes everything. Drop a comment and let me know what city you are watching from. I did not look back. The temperature in Chicago that night was -2 degrees. The wind coming off the lake felt like sharp glass against my skin. I did not scream. I did not pound my fists against the heavy oak door. Crying would not unlock the deadbolt, and panic would only drain the energy I desperately needed for the life growing inside me. I was 8 weeks pregnant with a little girl I had already named Mia. She needed a mother, not a victim. I walked down the driveway, my boots crunching softly against the fresh snow. Buster shivered in my arms. He was an old golden retriever, loyal and quiet, and he did not understand why we were outside in the dark. I opened the door of my 10-year-old sedan, placed him gently on the passenger seat, and turned the ignition. The engine hesitated, then roared to life. I turned the heater to the maximum setting and sat entirely still, listening to the hum of the fan. As the cabin slowly warmed, I let my mind do what I was paid to do every single day. I am a forensic accountant. I audit financial records, track hidden assets, and dismantle complex corporate frauds. I see the invisible threads connecting offshore accounts. Yet, sitting in that freezing car, I realized the most dangerous fraud of all had been happening inside my own home for 4 long years. Gabriel had not snapped. This was not a sudden argument that escalated out of control. It was a calculated eviction. Over the years, Gabriel and Claire had slowly conditioned me. They normalized a specific kind of coldness. If Gabriel ignored me for days, Claire would casually mention his high-pressure job managing wealth for the elite. If he belittled my career, she would remind me that my background was common and I should be grateful to be part of their family. They built an invisible chain of microaggressions, training me to accept less, to apologize for breathing, to doubt my own reality. It is a terrifying thing to realize that you have allowed yourself to become a minor character in your own life. But the freezing air sweeping through the car vents had a strange, clarifying effect. The illusion shattered completely. A man who locks his pregnant wife in the snow is not stressed. He is executing a strategy. He wanted me out of the house, and he wanted it done on a night when I would be completely vulnerable. He assumed my fear would make me compliant. He had miscalculated. The woman sitting in the driver's seat was no longer the apologetic wife he had groomed. I was an auditor, looking at a fundamentally corrupt balance sheet. I rested my hand on my stomach, feeling the slight curve beneath my thin sweater. Morning was hours away. At 8:45 in the morning, the heavy glass doors of the downtown bank finally unlocked. I walked inside, the warm air rushing over my numb face. Buster was safely curled in the heated car, wrapped in a spare jacket I had found in the trunk. I approached the teller counter, my posture perfectly straight despite having slept in a parking lot. I handed over a faded debit card. It was an old account from my first husband, Nathaniel. He had passed away years ago, but he had insisted on keeping a small emergency fund active for me. I just needed $50 for gas and coffee. "I need to check the balance, please," I said quietly. The teller swiped the card. A red flag immediately populated her monitor. She frowned, typed rapidly on her keyboard, and then her eyes widened. She excused herself and returned a moment later with the branch manager, a woman in a sharp navy suit, who looked at me with a mixture of shock and deep professional concern. "Ma'am," the manager whispered, gesturing toward a private glass office. "Please sit down. You need to see this." I followed her into the office and took a seat. While she logged into her terminal, I pulled out my phone. My forensic instincts were entirely awake now. Before dealing with Nathaniel's old card, I needed to know the status of my marital finances. I opened the banking app for the joint account I shared with Gabrielle. The screen loaded. The balance read $14.12. 2 days ago, that account held $85,000. It was our combined savings, the money I had personally deposited from my last 3 major corporate audits. My eyes scanned the transaction history. There it was. A single, massive, outgoing wire transfer. The timestamp read 11:42 at night. He had moved the money exactly 20 minutes after he locked the front door in my face. A quiet, icy calm settled over me. In legal terms, this was marital asset dissipation. Gabriel, a professional wealth manager, had just committed a textbook financial violation in a community property state. He thought taking the money would break me, leaving me too poor to hire a lawyer. Instead, he had just handed me a documented paper trail of his bad faith. He had handed me a weapon. I locked my phone screen and looked up at the bank manager. She turned her monitor toward me. It was not a screen showing a few $100s in emergency cash. It was a secure gateway portal, flashing with a priority legal hold from a wealth management firm in San Francisco. "Mrs. Harper," the manager said, her voice completely steady but laced with awe. "This card is linked to a holding trust. A trigger event has occurred, and the trustee has been trying to locate you for 3 months. My phone began to ring. The caller ID displayed a San Francisco area code. I answered the phone while sitting across from the silent bank manager. A man with a crisp, measured voice introduced himself as the managing partner of a premier estate law firm. "Caroline," he said smoothly, "we have been trying to reach you. I am managing the estate of your late husband, Nathaniel. We are executing the final provisions of his irrevocable trust. Nathaniel and I had married young. He was a brilliant, obsessive software engineer, building an artificial intelligence startup in a cramped garage. We divorced amicably when we realized our lives were heading in opposite directions. But we had always maintained a quiet, underlying respect. He passed away suddenly a few years ago. I knew his company had eventually been acquired, but I had never asked for details. It was his victory, not mine. I do not understand," I told the lawyer. "We were divorced. I asked for nothing. Which is exactly why he structured it this way." The lawyer replied. "Nathaniel updated his trust shortly before he died. He placed the proceeds of his company's acquisition into a highly secure, locked entity. You are the sole named beneficiary." "How much?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. $125 million, he stated. The number hung in the quiet bank office. 125 million. It was not just money. It was an empire. It was an absolute alteration of reality. "However," the lawyer continued, his tone shifting to strict professionalism, "the trust requires your physical biometric verification in San Francisco. Furthermore, it is currently sealed. Nathaniel designed the security architecture himself. It is impenetrable. But I must warn you, if you are in the middle of any marital litigation, you must secure your legal standing before claiming this. Otherwise, a hostile spouse might attempt to entangle the assets in a community property dispute." As he spoke, an email notification dropped down from the top of my phone screen. The sender was the State Board of Accountancy. I opened the email. It was a formal notice of an emergency review. An anonymous complaint had been filed against my professional license, citing fabricated ethical violations and severe financial mismanagement. The complaint included falsified client data that only someone with access to my home office could have acquired. Gabriel? He was not just locking me out. He was systematically destroying my ability to earn a living. He wanted my license revoked so I could never work as an auditor again. If I touched Nathaniel's trust now, Gabriel would somehow find out in the divorce discovery process. He would drag the inheritance into court, claiming a portion of it to settle the very debts he was artificially creating. I understand. I told the lawyer in San Francisco. Keep the trust locked. Do not send any physical mail to my Chicago address. I will contact you when the perimeter is secure. I ended the call and stood up. The bank manager offered me a glass of water, her hands shaking slightly. I politely declined. I had work to do. I walked back out into the bitter morning air and sat in the driver's seat of my car. Buster rested his chin on the center console, watching me with soulful, patient eyes. I stroked his head, my mind processing the digital attack Gabriel had just launched. The anonymous complaint to the audit board was a masterpiece of malicious compliance. It used industry-specific terminology, carefully weaving half-truths into a narrative of professional negligence. Gabriel was a wealth manager. He knew exactly which regulatory buttons to press to trigger an automatic suspension of my credentials. He wanted me disbarred, unemployable, and thoroughly humiliated. I could hear Claire's voice echoing in the back of my mind. She had spent years perfecting a tone of polite condescension. She loved to remind me that I came from a working-class family, that my ambition was unladylike, and that Gabriel had essentially rescued me from a life of mediocrity. They truly believed I was weak. They thought I was just a pregnant woman sitting alone in a freezing car, crying over a shattered marriage, completely paralyzed by the sheer force of their cruelty. They assumed I would beg for a cheap settlement, sign whatever non-disclosure agreement they presented, and quietly disappear. But Gabriel had made a fatal error. He possessed the arrogance of a man who had never faced a real consequence. He thought he could outsmart a woman who spent her entire career reading the digital footprints of white-collar criminals. He did not realize that by filing that fraudulent complaint, he had transmitted data from a specific IP address. By transferring $85,000 in the dead of night, he had generated banking timestamps. Every lie he told was a structural vulnerability. He was building a house of cards, and he had foolishly handed me the blueprints. I did not need to scream at him. I did not need to call him and demand an explanation. I needed to let him feel powerful. I needed him to believe his plan was working perfectly, so he would continue to make careless, arrogant mistakes. Let him celebrate his perceived victory in our warm house while I sat in the cold. But I could not fight a war from a parking lot. The temperature was dropping again, and the sky above Chicago was turning a heavy, bruised gray, threatening another snowstorm. My phone battery was at 18%. I had no access to my desktop computer, my physical files, or my professional software. I needed a secure location, an encrypted internet connection, and someone who would not ask unnecessary questions. I looked at the digital clock on the dashboard. It was 2:15 in the afternoon. There was only one person in the city I could trust unconditionally. I started the car engine. I drove through the gray, slush-filled streets of Chicago, letting the heater thaw my frozen hands. The rhythmic hum of the tires against the pavement gave me space to think. Gabriel's tactical cruelty was shocking, but it was not entirely new. It was simply the loudest version of the quiet disrespect he had shown me for years. My mind drifted to Nathaniel. Nathaniel had been my first husband. We met in our 20s when he was building his artificial intelligence company in a windowless garage. He was a brilliant, eccentric man who preferred the absolute logic of code to the unpredictable mess of human ego. When our marriage eventually ended, it was not due to betrayal or anger. We simply grew into two parallel lines that no longer intersected. But Nathaniel had possessed one trait that Gabriel fundamentally lacked. He respected me. He never viewed my analytical mind as a threat. While Gabriel and Claire constantly suggested my career as a forensic accountant was dry and unladylike, Nathaniel had called it an art form. He understood that my obsession with ledgers and financial structures was rooted in a deep need for truth. I remembered a rainy afternoon shortly after our divorce was finalized. He had handed me a sealed envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. I had kept it tucked inside my passport for years. "Caroline," he had written, "your honesty is your greatest asset, but it will always attract greedy people. They will see your patience and mistake it for weakness. Never let them balance your books." I had not fully understood the weight of those words until this very morning. Nathaniel had seen Gabriel coming long before Gabriel even existed in my life. He knew that my tendency to endure, to quietly fix things in the background, would eventually make me a target for someone who wanted to exploit my stability. That was why he had locked the trust. He had built a financial fortress that required my absolute, verified presence to open. He had given me a weapon, carefully hidden until the exact moment I would need it to survive. The sky darkened into an early, bitter twilight. The snow began to fall again, dusting the windshield in white powder. I checked the gas gauge. I had enough fuel to get across town, but I needed an encrypted internet connection and a safe place for Buster to sleep. I navigated toward a familiar neighborhood on the north side. I pulled into a narrow driveway. It was exactly 9 o'clock. I stood on the second-floor landing of the apartment building, Buster tucked securely under my left arm. I knocked twice on the heavy wooden door. 10 seconds later, the door swung open. Leo stood in the frame, wearing a faded gray sweatshirt, holding a mug of dark coffee. Leo and I had worked together at a major auditing firm for 5 years. He was a senior data analyst, a man of few words and absolute, unshakable loyalty. He was the kind of friend who did not need a dramatic explanation to understand a crisis. He looked at me, he looked at Buster, he looked at the snow melting on my shoulders. "Come in," he said simply. There were no frantic questions. There was no overwhelming pity. Leo stepped aside, took my coat, and immediately went to the hall closet to retrieve a thick, heated blanket. He spread it on the rug near the radiator for Buster, who sank into it with a deep, grateful sigh. Leo walked into the kitchen and returned with a plate of warm toast and a glass of water. He set it on the coffee table in front of me. "Gabriel?" Leo asked, his voice completely flat. "Yes," I replied. "He locked me out last night. He transferred $85,000 out of the joint account, and he filed a fraudulent complaint with the board to suspend my license." Leo did not gasp. He did not curse. He simply walked over to his desk, picked up his secondary laptop, a machine custom built for high-level data decryption, and set it on the table next to my toast. "Do you have the bank routing numbers?" he asked. "I memorized them," I said. This is the advantage of building a life around competent, quiet professionals. You do not have to waste energy translating your grief. We sat at the table in absolute silence for 2 hours. The apartment was warm, smelling of roasted coffee and old books. The panic that had been hovering at the edges of my mind finally dissolved, replaced by the familiar, cold precision of my profession. I logged into a secure virtual private network. I needed to establish a timeline of Gabriel's digital movements leading up to last night. A man does not suddenly drain an account and file a board complaint on a whim. He prepares. He researches. My fingers moved rapidly across the keyboard. The first log files downloaded. The next morning, the winter sun reflected blindingly off the fresh snow. I sat in a quiet, softly lit examination room at a private obstetric clinic. 2 years ago, during a brief period of freelance consulting, I had purchased a premium independent health insurance policy. Gabriel had mocked me for the expense, insisting I just use his corporate plan. I had quietly kept my own. It was the smartest financial decision I had ever made. The doctor, a kind woman with silver hair, glided the ultrasound wand over my stomach. The room was silent, except for the low hum of the medical equipment. "There," the doctor said softly, pointing to the monitor. A rapid, rhythmic swooshing sound filled the small room. It was strong. It was steady. It was the sound of a tiny, resilient life refusing to be diminished by the chaos outside. I stared at the screen, watching the small flicker of Mia's heartbeat. A profound sense of clarity washed over me. Gabriel had thrown us out into the freezing dark. He had tried to erase our financial security and my professional identity in a single night. He wanted this child to be born into anxiety and dependence. But listening to that heartbeat, I made a silent, irrevocable promise. I would not just survive this. I would build a foundation so absolute, so structurally sound, that Gabriel and Claire would never be able to reach us again. I wiped a single tear from my cheek, thanked the doctor, and requested physical copies of all my medical records, including the psychological intake evaluation confirming my sound mental health. A forensic auditor always keeps the receipts. I walked out to the parking lot. Leo was sitting in the driver's seat of his car with the engine running, keeping the heat on for Buster, who was snoring gently in the back seat. Leo handed me a fresh cup of decaf coffee as I got in. "Strong heartbeat?" he asked, not taking his eyes off the road. "Very strong," I said. "Good." Leo nodded. I ran the initial trace on the 85,000. He routed it through a holding company in Delaware, but it is sloppy. He left digital fingerprints? I took a sip of the warm coffee. We had the data. We had the timeline. But data alone does not win a war. I needed someone who could weaponize these documents within the legal system. I needed someone who did not believe in polite compromises. I needed a shark. Vivian's office was located on the 42nd floor of a glass tower overlooking the Chicago River. She did not decorate with warm colors or family photos. Her office was stark, monochromatic, and designed to make opposing counsel deeply uncomfortable. Vivian was a family law attorney known for dismantling narcissistic spouses with terrifying, surgical precision. I sat across from her massive desk, sliding a perfectly organized binder across the polished wood. "I have been locked out of my marital home," I stated calmly. "My husband transferred $85,000 at 11:42 on a Tuesday night, 20 minutes after the lockout. He has also filed a malicious board complaint to sever my income." Vivian did not offer me a sympathetic smile. She simply opened the binder. For 10 minutes. The only sound in the room was the crisp turning of pages. She analyzed the bank statements, the timestamps, and the IP logs Leo and I had extracted. When she finally looked up, her dark eyes gleamed with a specific, predatory satisfaction. "He is a wealth manager?" she asked. "Yes, a managing director. And he committed blatant marital asset dissipation via wire transfer, leaving a direct digital trail while his wife is 8 weeks pregnant." Vivian leaned back in her leather chair. "It is almost insulting how stupid he is." "He believes I am too intimidated to fight," I explained. "His mother has spent 4 years convincing him that I am entirely dependent on their social and financial standing." "Let them keep believing that," Vivian said smoothly. "We are going to file an emergency ex parte motion to freeze all of his personal and business accounts based on the flight of capital. We will not warn him. We will let his debit card decline when he tries to buy his morning espresso." She picked up a heavy silver pen and began drafting notes on a legal pad. "Caroline, you must maintain absolute radio silence," Vivian instructed. "Do not answer his calls. Do not reply to his mother's inevitable text messages. We want them operating in a vacuum. Narcissists make their largest errors when they are deprived of an audience." I nodded. I had already mastered the art of silence. I left Vivian's office feeling a strange sense of weightlessness. The architecture of Gabriel's ruin was officially in motion. But men like Gabriel do not sit still when they feel their control slipping. The first countermove arrived Friday afternoon. I was sitting at Leo's kitchen table on Friday, analyzing a spreadsheet, when an email from Vivian appeared in my inbox. Attached was a formal letter from Gabriel's legal counsel. It was a settlement offer. I opened the PDF and read through the legal jargon. Gabriel was proposing a rapid, uncontested divorce. He generously offered to return $42,000, exactly half of the money he had stolen in the middle of the night. He stated he would not contest full custody of the child, completely abandoning Mia before she was even born. But it was the final paragraph that caught my attention. The conditions. In exchange for this generous offer, I was required to sign a strict non-disclosure agreement. I could never speak publicly about the circumstances of our separation, and, buried in a subsection on page 3, was a highly specific clause. I was required to waive any and all claims, present or future, to any external trusts, inheritances, or corporate holdings acquired prior to our marriage. I stared at the screen. The cursor blinked steadily. Gabriel's lawyer had drafted this before Vivian even filed our emergency freeze. This was their opening gambit. They wanted to trap me in a legally binding corner while I was supposedly desperate, homeless, and terrified. "Leo," I called out quietly. He walked into the kitchen and read the screen over my shoulder. He tapped a finger against the third page. "Why is he asking you to waive rights to external trusts?" Leo asked, his brow furrowing. "Did you have a trust before you married him?" "My first husband, Nathaniel, left an irrevocable trust in San Francisco," I said softly. "I only found out about it 2 days ago. It is locked. Gabriel has absolutely no legal right to it." "Then why is he specifically neutralizing it in a settlement offer?" Leo pressed. I leaned back in the chair, my mind shifting into a higher gear. Gabriel was a wealth manager. He did not draft clauses by accident. He included that specific language because he thought the trust was a modest sum, maybe a few $100,000. And he wanted to ensure I could not use it to fund a protracted legal battle against him. But how did he know it existed? I had never mentioned Nathaniel's finances. Nathaniel had died years ago. The trust was private. Gabriel could not have found it unless he had been actively, intentionally hunting for it. I needed to see his search history. "Leo," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "Gabriel doesn't know the scale of Nathaniel's trust. He just knows a trust exists. He is trying to blindfold me before I can see the ledger." I pulled my primary laptop toward me. If Gabriel had been searching for Nathaniel's assets, he would have used a device he considered safe. He was arrogant, but he was cautious about his firm's secure servers. He would not have run a personal background check on his wife's dead ex-husband from his corporate office. He would have done it from home, and our home router was registered in my name. "I need to pull the DNS logs from the house," I told Leo. "I configured that network 3 years ago. The admin portal is cloud-linked." Leo handed me an Ethernet cable to stabilize the connection. Within 4 minutes, I had bypassed the basic security gateway of my own house. I downloaded the previous 60 days of browsing history, applying a filter for any queries related to San Francisco estate law, artificial intelligence acquisitions, or Nathaniel's name. The screen populated with 32 distinct search events. I checked the device identifiers. The searches did not originate from Gabriel's sleek, encrypted work laptop. They originated from a tablet. Specifically, an older model tablet that connected to our Wi-Fi every Sunday afternoon. I stared at the MAC address, the cold realization settling into my bones. Gabriel had not done the research himself. He had outsourced the surveillance to the one person who had the time, the malice, and the absolute lack of boundaries to dig into my past. Claire. My mother-in-law had spent the last 2 months drinking tea in my living room on Sunday afternoons, smiling at me, while quietly running deep web searches on my deceased first husband. She had found a breadcrumb about the San Francisco Trust. She had taken it to Gabriel. Together, they had orchestrated my eviction, timing it perfectly to break me before the trust could mature. They thought they were playing chess against a pawn. I closed the laptop and picked up my phone. I dialed the number for the managing partner in San Francisco. "I am ready," I said to the voice on the other end. "I am coming to California." I sat back in the wooden chair at Leo's kitchen table, the glowing screen of the laptop illuminating the dark room. The digital breadcrumbs formed a perfect, undeniable timeline. Claire had discovered the existence of Nathaniel's trust 2 months ago. I could almost picture her, sitting on my expensive living room sofa, sipping her Earl Grey tea, swiping through her tablet while I was in the kitchen preparing dinner. She had likely found an obscure legal notice or a tech industry newsletter mentioning the final liquidation of Nathaniel's artificial intelligence firm. She had taken that fragment of information straight to Gabriel. Gabriel, with his wealth manager's arrogance, had undoubtedly tried to dig deeper. But Nathaniel's legal firewall was too thick. They could not see the amount, but they knew a payout was coming. And then I got pregnant. My pregnancy accelerated their timeline. If Gabriel filed for divorce after the trust was unlocked, the funds might be scrutinized, and a judge might grant me a massive safety net for the child. He could not risk me having the financial resources to hire a formidable attorney. So, they engineered a crisis. They used a fabricated accusation of infidelity to justify throwing me out in the freezing snow. They drained the joint account to leave me entirely destitute. They filed the board complaint to destroy my professional reputation. Their ultimate goal was not just to hurt me. The goal was the non-disclosure agreement and the asset waiver sitting in my inbox. They wanted to starve me out for a few days, break my spirit, and force me to sign away my rights to Nathaniel's trust in exchange for a few $1,000s and a quiet divorce. It was a hostile corporate takeover disguised as a marital dispute. They built a very impressive trap, I said quietly, closing the laptop. But they forgot who they were trying to catch, Leo replied, handing me a small travel bag he had packed with a few of his spare sweaters and essential toiletries. I looked at my loyal friend. He had not slept in 24 hours, helping me trace IP addresses and decrypt logs. I asked him to watch Buster for the next 2 days, promising I would return before the dog even realized I was gone. I packed my forensic files, my laptop, and my medical records. I did not feel angry anymore. Anger is a messy, unpredictable emotion. What I felt was absolute, crystalline focus. The flight departed at dawn. I landed in San Francisco just before noon. The contrast to Chicago was almost disorienting. The sky was a brilliant, piercing blue, and the air smelled of salt and warm pavement instead of bitter ice. I took a car directly to the financial district, stepping out in front of a towering glass building that housed one of the most exclusive estate law firms on the West Coast. I rode the silent elevator to the top floor. The managing partner, a distinguished man named Mr. Sterling, met me in the reception area. He led me into a massive conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Golden Gate Bridge. "Caroline," he said, offering a polite but guarded smile. "It is good to finally meet you in person. Nathaniel spoke of you with immense respect." "Thank you, Mr. Sterling," I replied, taking a seat at the heavy mahogany table. "I apologize for the delay. My circumstances in Chicago have been somewhat complicated. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something. If you have ever had to silently build your armor while everyone around you thought you were completely broken, hit the like button and let me know in the comments, what is the very first thing you would do if you suddenly inherited $125 million? Mr. Sterling placed a heavy, leather-bound portfolio on the table. It was secured with a physical clasp and an intact, dark red wax seal bearing Nathaniel's company insignia. It looked archaic, a deliberate choice by a man who spent his life building advanced digital software. Nathaniel always appreciated the undeniable weight of physical proof. As I mentioned on the phone, "Mr. Sterling began, his voice dropping into a formal, legal cadence. "This trust is irrevocable. It was designed to bypass traditional probate entirely. But because of the unprecedented scale of the assets, Nathaniel required absolute biometric verification to unlock the final disbursement phase." He slid a digital fingerprint scanner across the table, followed by a stack of heavily watermarked documents. Are you currently under any legal duress? He asked carefully. Has your husband filed any claims against your separate property? My husband is entirely unaware of the scale of this trust, I stated calmly. And my attorney has already secured a freeze on his assets due to his own financial misconduct. Mr. Sterling's guarded expression finally cracked into a genuine smile. Excellent. Then let us begin. He broke the wax seal. For the next 2 hours, Mr. Sterling walked me through the architecture of the trust. As a forensic accountant, I have seen hundreds of complex financial structures, but what Nathaniel had built was a masterpiece of legal engineering. An irrevocable trust. Mr. Sterling explained, tapping a dense paragraph on the 3rd page. Means exactly what it sounds like. Once the grantor Nathaniel placed his company shares into this entity, he relinquished all ownership. The trust itself became the owner. Therefore, when you married Gabriel, this asset did not belong to you, nor did it belong to Nathaniel. It belonged to the trust. I nodded, following the logic perfectly. Because you are only claiming your beneficiary status now. Well, after your separation from Gabriel has effectively begun, he continued, this money is classified as 100% separate property. Gabriel cannot touch a single cent of it in a divorce proceeding. The state of Illinois, and certainly the state of California, will not allow him to pierce this veil. Gabriel attempted to force me to sign a waiver relinquishing my rights to this trust yesterday, I noted, sliding Vivian's printed email across the table. Mr. Sterling adjusted his glasses and read the settlement offer. He let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. This is remarkably foolish, the lawyer said, shaking his head. By demanding you waive rights to a trust he technically should not know about, while simultaneously transferring $85,000 out of a joint account in the middle of the night, he has handed you a weapon. The transfer is a textbook case of marital asset dissipation. He stole from the community pot to starve you out. I am aware, I said smoothly. My attorney in Chicago is preparing to use that specific transaction to dismantle him. Good, Mr. Sterling said, because the law favors a paper trail. Caroline, it does not care about his wealth management title, his expensive suits, or his mother's social standing. Justice in the financial world is entirely dependent on documentation. And Gabriel's documentation is deeply, legally flawed. He turned the page of the portfolio. Underneath the legal jargon was a single piece of heavy stationery. It was a handwritten letter. I recognized the sharp, slanted handwriting immediately. It was from Nathaniel. He asked me to give this to you once the identity verification was complete. Mr. Sterling said softly. I signed the final page. I picked up the handwritten letter. The paper was thick and slightly yellowed. Caroline, the letter began. If you are reading this, I am gone, and the company has been sold. I always knew you would never ask for anything. Your absolute honesty is rare, but as I warned you once before, it will attract predators. People who believe your patience is a vulnerability to be exploited. I took a slow breath, hearing his voice perfectly in my mind. I built this trust to be impenetrable, but my engineers and I also decided to build a perimeter defense, an active security measure. If someone tries to pick the lock on a vault, the vault should know exactly who they are. I looked up at Mr. Sterling, my brow furrowing in confusion. What does he mean by an active security measure? Mr. Sterling leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. The polite lawyer persona faded, replaced by something much sharper. Nathaniel's firm specialized in predictive artificial intelligence and cybersecurity, Mr. Sterling explained. He embedded a digital honeypot into the trust's external inquiry portal. 3 months ago, our system detected multiple unauthorized attempts to penetrate the trust's public-facing metadata. Someone was running sophisticated, targeted searches, trying to uncover the exact value of your inheritance. Gabriel, I whispered. And Claire? Yes. Mr. Sterling nodded. But the system did not just block them. That would be too simple. Nathaniel designed the AI to trace the origin of the hostile inquiry. When your husband's IP address repeatedly hammered our servers, our security protocols initiated a reverse audit to assess the threat level of the attacker. My heart began to beat faster. As an auditor, the implications of what he was saying were staggering. Because Gabriel was using a network connected to his own unencrypted personal devices, the AI performed a deep sweep of his digital footprint. Mr. Sterling said, his eyes locking onto mine. It bypassed his basic home router and pulled a comprehensive log of his financial routing history to ensure he was not a state-sponsored hacker. Mr. Sterling reached under the table and pulled out a thick, heavy, 300-page bound document. He placed it directly in front of me. We are legally required to hand this threat assessment log over to you, the beneficiary, he said smoothly. The printer began to hum. I opened the heavy bound document. The first few pages were standard network routing data, identifying the MAC addresses of Claire's tablet and Gabriel's home computer. But as I turned to Section 4, the data shifted from network security to financial architecture. My eyes scanned the columns of numbers, my professional training kicking in instantly. This cannot be right, I murmured, tracing a line of data with my index finger. I was looking at a hidden ledger. Gabriel, the polished, sophisticated wealth manager, had not just been hiding money from me. He had been hiding money from his clients. The AI had captured a series of recurring, automated wire transfers, moving from his firm's secure client holding accounts into a sequence of shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands and Belize. He was skimming. He was embezzling millions of dollars of client funds to sustain his lavish lifestyle, padding his own offshore accounts while pretending to be a financial genius. I sat back in my chair, the sheer magnitude of his arrogance washing over me. Gabriel had thought he was so incredibly smart. He thought he could steal $85,000 from his pregnant wife and leave her in the snow. He thought he could outmaneuver an estate lawyer. But his greed had driven him to poke a sleeping dragon. By trying to steal my inheritance, he had accidentally triggered an automated artificial intelligence system that completely exposed his massive, career-ending fraud. Do you understand what you are looking at? Caroline, Mr. Sterling asked quietly. I am looking at 20 years in a federal penitentiary for wire fraud, embezzlement, and securities violations, I said, my voice ice-cold. Exactly. Mr. Sterling replied, this document is not admissible in a criminal court on its own, as it was acquired through an automated defensive sweep. However, it provides the exact account numbers, routing sequences, and offshore shell company names. If a forensic accountant were to anonymously forward these specific account numbers to the Securities and Exchange Commission, he let the sentence trail off, offering a small, distinct nod. I pulled my encrypted phone from my purse and took high-resolution photographs of the primary ledger pages. I opened a secure messaging app and sent the images directly to Vivian in Chicago, along with a single line of text, "Prepare the hammer." The game was completely over. I flew back to Chicago the following morning. The storm had passed, leaving the city blanketed in brilliant, blinding white snow. I returned to Leo's apartment, exhausted but entirely at peace. Buster greeted me at the door with a slow, happy tail wag. I knelt down and buried my face in his golden fur, the faint smell of Leo's roasted coffee clinging to him. For the first time in 4 years, I felt completely safe. I was no longer the anxious wife trying to decode her husband's cold silences. I was a woman holding all the cards, standing on a foundation built of undeniable truth. Vivian had moved with terrifying speed. The emergency deposition was scheduled for Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock. On Monday evening, I took Buster for a short walk around the block. The icy air felt refreshing now. My phone vibrated in my coat pocket. It was a text message from Gabriel, the first direct communication he had attempted since locking the deadbolt in my face. Caroline, my lawyer says you haven't signed the settlement. Don't be stupid. You have no money and no license. Sign the NDA, take the cash, and move on with your life before I take the rest of it. I stared at the glowing screen. He was still trying to play the role of the untouchable king. He had absolutely no idea that Vivian had already subpoenaed his bank records, or that an unredacted map of his offshore embezzlement was currently sitting in a secure briefcase in downtown Chicago. I did not reply. I simply blocked his number. Silence is the most terrifying answer you can give a narcissist. Tomorrow morning, we would all sit at a long wooden table. Gabriel would wear his expensive gray suit. Claire would wear her practiced, condescending smile. They would walk into that room believing they were there to dictate the terms of my surrender. We are about to drop the hammer. If you are ready for Gabriel to lose that smug, arrogant smile once and for all, leave a in the comments. Right now, I went back inside, fed Buster, and laid out my professional charcoal suit for the morning. I slept a full 8 hours. I walked into the room. The conference room at Vivian's law firm was encased in heavy, soundproof glass. I sat perfectly still, my hands resting gracefully on the polished mahogany table. Across from me, Gabriel adjusted the cuffs of his expensive gray suit. He wore the relaxed, confident expression of a man who believed he had already won the war. Behind him sat his mother, Claire, holding a designer handbag on her lap. A tight, condescending smile painted on her face. They thought I was there to surrender. Vivian opened her leather binder. She did not raise her voice. She did not display an ounce of anger. She operated with the terrifying, mechanical precision of a ticking clock. "Mr. Harper," Vivian began, her tone conversational. "For the record, can you explain the withdrawal of $85,000 from the joint marital account on the evening of February the 12th? Gabriel scoffed softly, glancing at his own attorney. "It was a standard transfer for business expenses, a routine liquidity maneuver for a commercial investment." Vivian slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was the bank timestamp Leo had extracted. A routine maneuver conducted at 11:42 at night, exactly 20 minutes after you unlawfully locked your pregnant wife out of your shared residence in sub-zero temperatures. Vivian asked. "That is not an investment. Mr. Harper, that is a documented violation of community property law, otherwise known as marital asset dissipation." Gabriel's arrogant smile faltered slightly. His attorney shifted uncomfortably in his leather chair. "My client will restore the funds upon the signing of the non-disclosure agreement." Gabriel's lawyer interjected quickly. "We are not signing an agreement," Vivian replied smoothly, pulling a second, much thicker stack of papers from her binder. "Because community property is no longer our primary concern. Let us discuss the Cayman Islands, Belize, and the artificial intelligence security grid you accidentally triggered on Sunday." Gabriel froze. The color drained completely from his face, leaving his skin a pale, sickly gray. Vivian placed the unredacted offshore ledger directly in front of him. "When you attempted to digitally infiltrate Nathaniel's irrevocable trust to steal your wife's separate property inheritance," Vivian said, her voice dropping into a lethal whisper, "the security system traced your IP address. It performed an automated audit of your personal network. It found your hidden client accounts. Gabriel, it found the millions you have been embezzling for the last 5 years." The silence in the room was absolute. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a structural collapse. Gabriel stared at the routing numbers on the page, his mouth opening and closing without any sound. Claire leaned forward, her eyes widening in sheer panic as she realized her son's entire empire was built on stolen sand. I looked directly into Gabriel's eyes. I did not yell. I did not gloat. I simply let him drown in the irrefutable evidence of his own ruin. The deposition was over. I knew better than to expect a clean surrender. People like Claire do not possess the capacity for graceful defeat. When their illusions of superiority are threatened, they do not apologize. They escalate. The following afternoon, Vivian called me with an emergency update. Claire had hired a notoriously aggressive defense attorney and filed an emergency ex parte motion in family court. She was petitioning for a conservatorship over me. They submitted a sworn affidavit from a private psychiatrist. Vivian explained over the phone. The doctor claims he observed you exhibiting severe pregnancy-induced psychosis and paranoia. Claire is arguing that you are a danger to yourself and your unborn child, and therefore, you are entirely unfit to manage the $125 million trust. It was a desperate, malicious attempt to freeze the inheritance and seize control of my life. If the judge granted the temporary order, Claire would become my legal guardian, but a forensic accountant never leaves a structural vulnerability. Let them bring it to the judge, I told Vivian calmly. The emergency hearing took place the next morning. Claire stood before the judge, weeping artificial tears, painting a tragic picture of a broken daughter-in-law who had lost her grip on reality. Her lawyer presented the psychiatrist's evaluation with dramatic flair. When it was our turn, Vivian did not argue. She simply approached the bench and submitted a sealed medical envelope. Your Honor, Vivian said clearly. My client is currently under the continuous care of Dr. Eris Thorne, the chief of obstetrics at Northwestern Memorial. Inside that envelope is a comprehensive, time-stamped psychological evaluation completed just 5 days ago, confirming Mrs. Harper is in perfect physical and mental health. The judge frowned, breaking the seal and reviewing the genuine medical records. Furthermore, Vivian continued, holding up a small USB drive, we have subpoenaed the financial records of the psychiatrist who signed the opposing affidavit. We found a direct wire transfer of $15,000 from Claire Harper's personal account to that doctor, dated yesterday evening. It is a documented bribe. The courtroom went dead silent. The judge's face turned scarlet with rage. The paper wall had completely crumbled. The judge struck down the conservatorship immediately, issuing a severe sanction against Claire's attorney and formally referring Claire and her hired doctor to the district attorney for perjury and fraud. Claire looked at me from across the aisle, her hands trembling uncontrollably. She had tried to bury me alive using the legal system, but she had brought a shovel to a bulldozer fight. I gave her a polite, entirely hollow nod and walked out of the courtroom. The collapse of Gabrielle and Claire's world was swift and absolute. Once the offshore ledgers were submitted to the Securities and Exchange Commission, Gabriel's wealth management firm fired him immediately, cooperating fully with federal investigators to avoid their own corporate liability. His professional licenses were revoked permanently. The state froze his remaining domestic accounts to compensate the clients he had stolen from. Gabriel, who had once prided himself on wearing bespoke suits and managing the fortunes of the elite, was now facing multiple counts of federal wire fraud and a lengthy prison sentence. Claire did not fare much better. The criminal referral for perjury tied up what little resources she had left. Without Gabriel's embezzled funds to sustain her lavish lifestyle, the bank foreclosed on her sprawling suburban mansion. There is a specific psychological phenomenon known as narcissistic injury, when individuals who build their entire identity around material wealth and social superiority are suddenly stripped of those external markers. They experience a profound psychological collapse. They do not know how to exist without an audience to admire them or a victim to look down upon. For years, Claire and Gabriel had operated under the illusion of the empty wallet. They believed that having money equated to having character. They assumed my quiet nature and my working-class background meant I was inherently inferior. But a bank account is not a personality trait. When the money vanished, there was nothing left underneath but two deeply hollow, terrified people. I watched their downfall from a distance, feeling no joy, but also no pity. I had simply balanced the ledger. The divorce was finalized quietly in a judge's chambers. Gabriel did not attend. He was too busy consulting with his criminal defense team. I retained full sole custody of Mia, the house in Chicago, and every cent of Nathaniel's irrevocable trust. The winter slowly gave way to a bright, vibrant spring. The freezing nights spent in a grocery store parking lot felt like a distant memory from another lifetime. I had survived the storm, and now it was time to build something new, something that no one would ever be able to lock me out of again. I picked up a pen and began drafting a new business plan. 3 years later, the morning sun poured through the massive bay windows of my living room. The air was warm, carrying the scent of fresh coffee and blooming hydrangeas. "Mommy, look!" a bright, cheerful voice called out. I looked up from my laptop. Mia, now a vibrant 2.5-year-old with dark, inquisitive eyes, was successfully stacking a tower of wooden blocks on the rug. Buster, whose muzzle was now entirely white, lay next to her, gently resting his heavy head on his paws, watching over her like a dedicated guardian. "That is a very strong tower, sweetheart," I said, smiling as I took a sip of my coffee. We were not living in the cold, modern house I had shared with Gabriel. I had sold that property immediately after the divorce. Instead, we lived in a beautiful, historic brownstone in a quiet neighborhood. It was a home filled with warmth, laughter, and absolute security. My professional life had also undergone a massive transformation. Using a small fraction of the trust's initial disbursement, I had opened my own firm. At 10 o'clock, I drove downtown to a sprawling, elegant stone mansion. The brass plaque on the heavy oak door read Harper and Leo Forensic Accounting. Leo met me in the lobby, holding 2 files and a cup of tea. We had built this firm with a very specific mission. We specialized in aggressive financial audits for women going through high-conflict divorces. We tracked hidden assets, exposed offshore accounts, and ensured that no woman would ever be starved out or bullied into signing away her future. But the most satisfying detail of the firm was not our rapidly growing client list. It was the building itself. When Claire's mansion had gone into foreclosure due to her mounting legal debts, the bank had listed it at a severely reduced commercial auction price. I had purchased it anonymously through a holding company. I took the house where Claire had once sipped tea and plotted to ruin my life, gutted the interior, and turned it into a sanctuary for women fighting back against men exactly like her son. It was the most poetic real estate transaction of my life. I walked into my spacious office, where the sunlight caught the edge of a silver picture frame on my desk. It was a photo of Nathaniel, smiling in his garage all those years ago. He had known my worth before I even understood it myself. I opened the top drawer of my desk. I pulled out a heavy, leather-bound checkbook linked directly to the San Francisco Trust. Today was the official inauguration of the Nathaniel Caldwell Scholarship for Women in STEM. It was a fully funded endowment designed to provide full-ride university tuitions to young women from working-class backgrounds who wanted to study mathematics, engineering, and forensic auditing. I wrote out the first disbursement check, ensuring every zero was perfectly aligned. As I signed my name at the bottom, I looked out the large window at the bustling Chicago street below. I thought about the terrified, pregnant woman sitting in a freezing car in a grocery store parking lot. It would have been so easy to give up that night. It would have been so easy to accept the narrative that Gabriel and Claire had written for me that I was weak, desperate, and entirely dependent on their mercy. But legacy is not just what you inherit. It is what you possess the courage to protect. If this journey has taught me anything, it is a very simple, undeniable truth. The most dangerous enemies in your life will always calculate their attacks based on your innocence. They will weaponize your patience and mistake your silence for submission. Do not scream at them. Do not beg them for closure. Answer them with a cold, airtight preparation of paperwork, and let their own arrogance build the gallows. A paper trail does not lie, and the truth always keeps a perfect ledger. What would you have done if you found yourself locked out in the snow with nothing but an old debit card and a dog? Tell me in the comments below. I read every single one. If Caroline's journey showed you that the absolute best revenge is unbothered success and an airtight paper trail, hit the subscribe button and share this story with someone who needs to hear it today. Thank you for watching, and never let anyone balance your books.